Well, hi there. Hey, how's it going? How are you today? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So, that's what I talk about. If you like true crime and want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and come hang out with me every Tuesday where I take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on my war paint. Happy April, it's a new month. I have got new cases that I am very anxious to discuss with you all. And yeah, I noticed that I got a few new subscribers. So hi, thank you so much for subscribing to my little channel. I know I don't, have a lot, but yeah, it really means a lot. Like whether, you just click on one of my videos, like subscribe, like any, comment, anything. I'm just super appreciative. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to, watch my little videos. Okay, well, before we get into today's case, which is, it's bonkers. All right, I have got a fun little announcement, so let's get into that super quick. All right. So yeah, I'm super excited. I am another ambassador, this time for Mendy brushes. They are these awesome, affordable, high quality, super cute makeup brushes. And I am fortunate enough to be an ambassador. And yeah, I have right here the transparent glitter in purple. I got the 10-piece, as you'll see here. These are the ones that I'm using in today's video. And yeah, I love these. Like, not only are they super, super pretty, all right, and like cool looking, they're also very high quality. Like, the brushes are super soft. They blend really well. And you know how like with cheap makeup brushes, sometimes like little hairs or like bristles will be left behind? Like, not so with these. These are super, super high quality and they blend really well, and I'm just a huge fan. I can't wait to get more. I also have a promo code for y'all. Just put in my name, Crystal Sky, S-K-Y-E, and you will get 30% off your order. 30% off. I know, it's amazing. So yeah, here is their Instagram as well. You can go ahead and follow them, and I will also be posting on my Instagram, photos of the brushes and like me using them. And yeah, I'm super excited to get more. I'm super excited to be able to be an ambassador for Mendy brushes. Thank you so much for partnering with me. Their website is Mendy, M-E-N-D-I -brushes.com. And yeah, check them out. Thank you again for reaching out to me, guys, to be an ambassador. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into today's case, shall we? So yeah, super, super exciting. This is totally awesome. Like I said, these are the brushes that I'll be using today. Yeah, they're super cool. I can't wait to get some more. Okay, well, enough of that. All right, let's get into today's case. All right, because oh man. Okay, so not only is today's case a lot. All right, a lot. It's a long one. So I totally get you if you need to like watch this in chunks. I know my videos are long. We get into some rough stuff, So hey. Totally understand. I am here for you whenever, okay? Today we will be talking about another serial killers, actually, all right? It's serial killers. It's a pair. And it occurs during that like weird time in LA, like was it like in the 70s and 80s where it was like serial killers galore? You've got like Hillside Strangler, Night Stalker, Toolbox Killers, and like the list went on and on, right? Well, these killings took place around this time. Today, we will be talking about Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy, aka the Sunset Strip Killers. They were also known as the Sunset Strip Slayers as well. And like I said, this occurred around that time in LA where it was just serial killers everywhere. This just seemed to be the place to be for them. And these killings sort of got swept under the radar. I believe these occurred around the time the Hillside Strangler was going down, I think. So yeah, I noticed as far as mainstream media goes, and like main like news coverage or, these don't really get reported on a whole lot. And like this case is just wild is an understatement. All right. But it's just a lot. So, yeah, it's a long one. And, before we get into it, quick disclaimer. Yeah, this case has it all. All right. Graphic description of crime scenes. We've got dismemberments, decapitation, talk of child sex abuse, necrophilia. Like it's just a lot. Okay. So just be forewarned. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the Sunset Strip killers, Carol Bundy and Douglas Clark. And we're going to start with Douglas Clark, okay? So, Douglas Daniel Clark, he was born March 10th, 1948, and his parents were Franklin and Blanche Clark. Now, Doug, he was the fourth of fifth children. There was Franklin Jr., Carol Ann, Walter, Doug, and then John. Franklin, his father, was a naval officer, and Blanche was a homemaker. And the Clarks, they were from a pretty well-to-do family. I think Franklin may have been like a pretty high-ranking naval officer. And yeah, so they were pretty well-to-do. And it also said that Doug's parents just doted on their little Dougie. Even though he was the fourth of five, he was treated as like the baby. Now, his older brother Walter, he thinks it's because Doug just, he's a master manipulator, all right? He's a master manipulator, pathological liar, and most dangerous of all, he has that charisma that gets people on his side. So yeah, Doug's parents really doted on him. Now, thanks to Franklin's career, the Clark family lived all around the world. And Dougie here, he had a very privileged upbringing, all right? Lived all over the world, went to prestigious schools. He had a very privileged childhood and upbringing. So, yeah, Doug lived a very privileged lifestyle, and he attended very prestigious schools. He attended the International School, which is located in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, this school, all right, it's very well-to-do. It's very posh. Not only do privileged, upper-class kids go there, children of international celebrities attend there, children of diplomats, children of very, very successful like businessmen and billionaires and stuff. It is a very well-to-do school, and that's where Doug attended. Now, it is said that his reputation there was kind of one of a bully, and he was just sort of sullen, and he would always brag about how rich and well off his family was, how well-to-do they are, and it's like, bro, you're at a rich school, everyone's family is like well-to-do, so I don't know, maybe he was a little insecure because being a high-ranking naval officer, that's quite an achievement, right? But when it's compared to children of diplomats or celebrities or something, I don't know, maybe Doug was a little insecure about that because as we will get into, Doug is a very, very insecure little boy, all right? And he remains that way. So yeah, Doug was a little bit of a bully, always bragging, and he would take to destroying his classmates' things. He would lash out. It seems that he destroyed mostly textbooks and stuff, but yeah, he was kind of like a little turd, And teachers said that when confronted with what he did, it didn't matter if they had stone cold hard evidence that is just right there in your face. This is Doug, we know that you did this. Here's the evidence. Here's the proof, It said it didn't matter. He would deny everything. And that is something that, again, we will see Doug exhibit throughout his whole life is pathological liar, always lying and never taking accountability for anything, like for anything. Doug was eventually expelled from the international school. Now, we're not quite sure why he was expelled. Dougie's parents said that there was nothing wrong. Okay, there was nothing wrong at the international school, all right? Yeah, they don't expel kids when there's nothing wrong. But yeah, so they've been pretty tight-lipped. Don't know why he was expelled, but he was. And after he's expelled from the international school, Doug then attends the Culver Academy in Indiana, and this is a military school. And he would end up graduating from there. And so, yeah, during his teens, this is when Doug discovers that he has a few like fetishes, if you will. He starts to steal his sister's underwear and start wearing that. He starts like really enjoying that. Again, something that he will exhibit for the rest of his life. He also developed a very unhealthy drinking habit. He drank a lot. He would cut school and drink. And I think he was actually able to drink quite a bit when he was at the international school as well. And as he got older and started, dating and getting into that field, he discovered a taste for older, overweight women who were particularly lonely, so usually like divorcees or something, who just so happened to look eerily a lot like Blanche, his mother. Yeah, Dougie has some mommy issues. Now, the reason Doug couldn't get girls his own age is because word quickly got around that if you were a girl who had a romantic encounter with Doug Clark, chances are you were going to be recorded without your knowledge. Yeah. Doug, I don't know why I said Douglas, Doug had done this like once or twice, all right, with fellow classmates, with some girls that he had some liaisons with. And yeah, he recorded it without their permission. Yeah, no, Doug. Huge no. And word of this quickly got around. And so, yeah, the girls quickly decided that, yeah, Doug was no good. He was no good. And so this is when, like, Doug would start trolling bars looking for older women who seem to be, lonely, Doug, he discovers that he has this ability to woo these kind of women, like a certain type of woman who was like lonely and, like I said, usually older, maybe a little overweight. He just had like an eye for these kind of women. And he discovered that he had this ability to manipulate them and woo them. He had that charm and charisma. Now, it is said that Doug was pretty good looking, which I don't know. I've shown a couple of younger pictures of Doug and I can see he kind of looks handsome, but like, I don't know, man, as he gets older, I think he looks pretty creepy to me, but yeah, that's just me. But yeah, he discovers that he has this knack for like wooing them. And he also discovers that just knowing a little bit about, everything, it enables him to sort of like come off as like this high intellectual, who was very smart. And then when you add in his like charm and stuff, he was able to give off this like high intellectual, charming, charismatic persona that in real life he actually lacked. And this is when, Doug starts to develop these traits of his, and he uses them to his advantage for the rest of his life, After graduation, Doug joined the Air Force, and he joined studying radio intelligence. And he did this because he wanted to enter a field that would pretty much ensure that he was not going to get sent to the front lines. So he studied radio intelligence because Doug was super scared of going to Vietnam, right? He was super scared. And Doug would go on to exaggerate his time in the Air Force. He would talk about being in hand-to-hand combat, being a prisoner of war, and yeah, just really exaggerate his time in the service. And because he just has that, that charisma, that je ne sais quoi, it drew people in, and he had a way with words. So yeah, he enjoyed the attention that these stories gave him. And so yeah, he would go on to brag about his time in the service when he didn't really see any action, which is just so beyond insulting to people who actually went and served and risked their life, or those who died, right? Like, what a tool. But as we'll get into, that's the least offensive thing that Dougie does, okay? Now, Doug managed to achieve the rank of E3 before he mysteriously left the Air Force before his term was up, all right? But he did leave with an honorable discharge, a National Defense Service Medal, and all of his benefits intact, but we do not know why. Like, we don't know why he left the Air Force, why it was before his tenure, and why everything was intact. The Air Force has been super, super tight-lipped about it, and Doug has told multiple stories over the years, each of which, of course, paints him in, like, the victim light or, like, in the heroic light. So, like I said, Doug's a pathological liar. So, yeah, we don't know. Just that he left the Air Force early. In 1972, Doug married Beverly, who was a 27-year-old, older, overweight woman. She was a divorcee. They met at a bar in North Hollywood, and they would eventually, get together, get married, and actually start a car upholstery business together. But it never really went anywhere, wasn't really much of a success. As anyone who's run a business, right, you gotta put work into it. And Doug, he lacks drive and initiative. Again, another common theme throughout his life that he will exhibit the rest of his life. Doug's lazy, all right? He just doesn't have a lot of drive and ambition. And yeah, he didn't, he lacked that, so the business eventually folded. Now, though both Doug and Beverly maintain that there was genuine affection in the relationship, and that Doug genuinely loved her, Doug constantly cheated on Beverly, constantly. And what drove Beverly to finally divorce Doug in 1976, it wasn't his constant cheating. It wasn't the fact that he would steal her underwear and wear it. And it wasn't the fact that he would pressure her into swinging and like threesomes and wife swapping. It was that he lacked any drive or initiative, okay? And that's what Beverly said. And so, yeah, they eventually divorced. Yeah, like I said, he's lazy, all right? He's lazy and he's kind of a mooch, Now, all throughout the 1970s, Doug drifted from one menial job to the next, and it was actually due to Beverly's insistence that he applied and got a job working for the city as a steam plant trainee. And by 1980, he was working as a boiler tending engineer at the Jergens Corporation plant in Burbank, California. So it was even thanks to Beverly's own insistence that he even managed to get a job that enabled him to have a career, long after Beverly left him. And yeah, like I said, Doug, he's just lazy, he's a mooch. And this is what he would do his whole life. He would he would go to troll bars looking for women, older women, lonely women that he could manipulate, and have them fund his lifestyle until they finally got wise and, kicked his butt to the curb, and then he'd go on to the next, Now, whether it was due to, mismanaged funds or what, because I think he was paid pretty decently at the Jergens Corporation, Doug was always hard up for cash. So that was another reason why he was trying to, find women to fund his lifestyle. Now, Doug met another woman that he would use and abuse. Her name was Carol Bundy. And he met her at the Little Nashville Bar in North Hollywood around the holidays in 1979. Doug was 31 years old at this time, and Carol was 37. Now, let's get into Carol. What can we say about Carol? Oh boy, Carol is a character, to say the least. I'm not quite sure what to say about her, but let's get into Carol. Carol Mary Peters was born August 26th, 1942, to Charles and Gladys Peters. Gladys was a hairdresser and was actually, she was a Hollywood stand-in for Hollywood tap dancing star Ruby Keeler. So, yeah. Carol had an older brother named Gene and a younger sister named Vicky, so Carol was the middle child. Now, up until she was about 3 years old, Carol had a very bright and sunny disposition and cute baby doll looks. Everyone thought Carol was going to take after her mother. And Just the vibe that I got from the research that I did, it seems looks were pretty important in the Peters family. But unfortunately for Carol, when she was around 3 years old, around the time Vicky was born, her disposition changed. She became sullen and withdrawn. She kind of lost that baby doll cuteness she had in like infancy and like her very early years, and just kind of developed sort of like awkward looks. Her vision also got really bad to where she had to wear like thick Coke bottle like glasses, which, you know, the kind that like magnify your eyes. And because of this, Carol was bullied mercilessly at school, and she said that she was shunned by her siblings as well. Now, her siblings tell a different story, right? And it's kind of hard to parse out. It's hard to parse out fact from fiction when we're talking about Carol. So like Doug, Carol is a pathological liar, all right? Now, her siblings remember certain events differently than Carol, you know. But again, I can also believe, right, that usually children who are not subjected to like abuse or bullying or anything, they usually have like a different recollection, you know. So kind of hard, but we do know she was bullied at school. That is a fact. And to combat her daily life, Carol dove into literary science fiction and fantasy. I can totally relate with her on that one. And another fact that we do know is both Charles and Gladys, they were violent alcoholics, all right? They were not, they were no parents of the year, you know? Now, even though she wasn't particularly close to her mother, it was still very hard for 13-year-old Carol when her mother passed away suddenly and unexpectedly and quick. Now, Gene at this time, the older brother, he had left home at this time, and Vicky was 11 years old, and like I said, Carol was 13. And it was at this time that both Carol and Vicky began to be sexually abused by their father, Charles. Yeah, I know. So, he told the girls, not only was it the responsibility to replace their mother in terms of cooking and cleaning, it was also their responsibility to replace their mother in the bedroom. And in fact, on the day that their mother died, he came home from the hospital, the day that Gladys died, he told Vicky and Carol that they had to pick between the two of them which one of them was going to come to bed with him that night. I know. Facts in this case just get worse, all right? So I'm warning you. After Vicky lost a game of rock, paper, scissors, Carol went to her bedroom and tried to shut out the cries of pain and help that she heard coming from Vicky. And Carol would carry great guilt with her from this moment onward. She would actually carry this burden of guilt for the rest of her life. She would tend to feel guilty about things. She kind of felt like since she was the older sister, she maybe should have like offered herself up as like a sacrifice or something, you know, but it wouldn't matter because Charles would just go on to also sexually abuse Carol, and he would go on to abuse the girls for the better part of a year. When he met another woman and moved her into the house. Yeah, I know. Now, of course, Carol had not good reactions to the abuse. Not a lot of people do. They react in different ways to trauma and abuse, right? Carol was she was one of those people who sort of like blocked out the abuse. She would even like deny it at times altogether. Even one time, Vicky confronted their father, Charles, in front of other relatives, and Carol did not have her back. She said she was not sexually abused by their father. She also acted out in very unhealthy ways because of this abuse. She took to voyeurism, where she would spy on the neighbors when they were, having their alone time. She would streak naked outside. She would touch herself and, masturbate in public. And she also soon began trading sexual favors in exchange for cash with her classmates, with the other boys. Now, Carol didn't really enjoy the act of sex per se. What Carol really craved, what Carol will crave the rest of her life, is attention. she loved that feeling of being desired, all right? Like in that very moment, right? In that moment of passion, it is nothing else but like you and the other person, right? And that is a feeling that Carol would chase for the rest of her life. And that's why she started engaging in a lot of sexual activity, because she was chasing that feeling. And she knew that the feeling was fleeting in the moment, but yeah, that she knew no other way to get it. Carol took to running away when her father was at his most drunkest, i.e. most violent. So she had run away multiple times. And one time she ran away. She came home later that night, hoping that, hopefully Dad's like passed out. And she noticed like there's no one around. She's like, that's weird. And the lights were off. And she walks into the living room and she sees that, again, lights are off and her father's gun case is laying wide open. That's weird. And then she looks and she sees blood on the curtain. And then she looks down and sees the family cat dead from a gunshot wound. I know. And it is at that moment that behind her, Charles appears in the doorway holding his shotgun. And eerily calm explains to Carol that he had a fight with her stepmother. And it was in that moment, when they were fighting, that he decided that he was going to kill his entire family, starting with Carol's stepmother. And that's when he got out the gun. Now, thankfully, Carol's stepmother was able to get the gun away from Charles, but not before an accidental shot was released, killing the cat. Carol's stepmother, of course, filed for divorce, which, by the way, the marriage was only a few months old at this point. I know. And, of course, she was granted that. And Carol and Vicky were shuffled from foster home to foster home before landing with an uncle in Indiana. But, get this. Within a year, I think less than a year, Charles drove from California to Indiana to pick the girls up. And, he was allowed to. I don't know what happened with the attempted murder of Carol's stepmother. I don't know what happened with that, but yeah, this fool was able to just go pick up his daughters. Carol would end up dropping out of school in the 9th grade and not being able to take the daily beatings from Charles anymore. I don't know if he was still sexually abusing the girls, probably, but I don't know. But not being able to take the daily beatings from her father anymore. Carol left home at 17 years old. She ran away and married a 56-year-old, alcoholic, unemployed, abusive a-hole named Leonard. She just could not take being at home anymore. And she didn't even love Leonard. It was just her way out. And that's when she left home. So, like I said, Leonard wasn't much better. He not only was unemployed and abusive and struggled with alcoholism, he also constantly pushed Carol into doing sex work. And finally, tired of his BS, Carol left him, I think within a year, within a very short period of time. I am unclear as if if she did sex work as Leonard wanted her to, unclear. But after she leaves Leonard, she then meets a 32-year-old man named Richard Geis. Richard was a writer who specialized in pornography and who occasionally dipped his toe into science fiction. Now, look, I know, you're like me, you're just like, oh my god, this girl, she's going from a 56-year-old to a 32-year-old, she's 17, I know, but as we'll see with Carol, the bar is pretty low, and Richard will actually end up being one of the better guys that she meets, so despite the age gap. Richard, he encouraged Carol to be a writer because Carol had always been interested in writing. She really liked to write. Remember, she used to read a lot to escape being bullied. And yeah, Richard encouraged her. He even bought her a typewriter and gave her a crash course in writing. And Carol even did manage to sell a few articles, and she even wrote, published, and illustrated a single edition science fiction fan magazine. So, she's doing pretty well. So, yay. But, of course, not everything good can last. Not for Carol. It's around when she's with Richard, when she's doing well, that Charles, he ends up killing himself by hanging himself, which I think we can all agree, right? Good riddance. What a horrible, awful human. But, it is when Carol, finds out that her father has killed himself that, she feels really guilty. And this is when she starts, again, exhibiting behavior that she will exhibit the rest of her life. She starts sort of sabotaging the relationship with Richard. She carries tremendous guilt for her father dying, and she just starts sort of withdrawing away from herself, distancing herself from Richard and the relationship. And yeah, even though she craved that feeling of being desired and, you know, that emotional connection, Carol she would always retreat at, you know, the slightest hint of that. I think she was like afraid of having that or something. It's like whenever she came close to that, she pushed it away. And when she was in situations where that wasn't even obtainable, she got even closer in the relationship. It very bizarre, very bizarre. Richard finally ended the relationship with Carol when he found out that she was still doing sex work. So yeah, that's why I'm unclear on if she did do sex work as Leonard wanted. But yeah, she was doing sex work behind Richard's back, and is at that point that he decides to end the relationship. But yeah, Richard and Carol would end up still being, you know, friends, and he would be someone that she could turn to and, you know, as like a friend and as like a supporter. And he would even pay for her to go to nursing school. And Carol did. She went to nursing school and graduated and got a job at the Valley Medical Center in Van Nuys, California. And she became a nurse, all right? So, like, things are looking up, right? While at Valley Medical Center, she met and married a fellow nurse named Grant Bundy. And they would end up having 2 sons together. Now, unfortunately, it wouldn't be all sunshine and roses. After the birth of the first of her 2 sons, Carol's health really began to deteriorate. She had diabetes, and she had always suffered from poor vision. And these problems just got worse because, you know, caring for 2 infants and being a nurse and stuff, Carol just wasn't taking proper care of herself, and her vision was, like, deteriorating. And Grant started stressing out. He was stressing out that, you know, oh, Carol's, like, going to go blind. She's going to, like, go on disability, and then I'm going to have to, like, provide for the family all on my own. And he started drinking, and he would start abusing Carol. I also heard that he started abusing her as early as her first pregnancy. But yeah, the relationship was abusive. In 1979, Carol left Grant and found herself in a battered woman shelter. And here, she would meet another tool bag. She would meet Jack Robert Murray, who was a manager at an apartment complex, the Valero Gardens, and he actually moved Carol and her sons into the complex. Jack Murray was 44 years old, and he was an Australian country and western singer, all right? And he played at the local dive bars in the area and was a headliner at the Little Nashville bar in North Hollywood. Some compare Jack to like a poor man's Tom Jones. That was sort of like his aesthetic that he was going for, as you can see from his pictures, right? He was totally going for that. Jack was married to a lovely woman named Jeanette, and they had 2 children, and Jack was abusive to Jeanette, especially when he drank, as a lot of men in this story are. Like, I don't know what the hell is up with that. But yeah, so he would abuse her, and on top of that, he would also constantly cheat on her. I know. Jack's a real prince. Now, Jack was a textbook abuser to not just Jeanette, but his mistresses as well. That classic textbook abuser, right? Where he would start off with the love bombing, you know, giving them compliments, showering them with attention and gifts, telling them how great they are, before he would pull the rug out from under them and, you know, start being abusive, right? And asserting his dominance. That was his MO. Like Doug, Jack also liked to brag about outlandish things, such as being part of law enforcement. He even carried around a fake law enforcement badge to, like, back up his claim. I swear, some of the things some dudes will do for tail is just ridiculous. And, like with many women before her, Jack would end up having an affair with Carol, and, of course it's not going to be healthy, of course. So, first with the love bombing, right? So, Jack, he convinces Carol to file for disability, Social Security, made sure she got the profits from the house that she was selling with Grant, and he also convinced her to go to the doctor to look at her eyesight. Turns out she only had cataracts, and her vision could greatly be improved with surgery. So she got that, and so now, you know, she can see pretty clearly now, right? But because she can see clearly now, she doesn't really like her reflection. She doesn't really like what she sees. And of course, Jack uses that to his advantage and to manipulate her, which is what he will do from now on, use her insecurities and self-loathing. He would scam her out of her disability, out of her Social Security, and the profits from the house. He even convinced Carol to give him $10,000 for a supposed cancer operation for Jeanette, his wife. And Carol, who was just head over heels in love with Jack, like, fell for it every time. She was gullible. She just would do anything that he wanted. And yeah, she would just hand it over every time. She would also follow Jack around like a lovesick puppy dog, you know, just like asking him to come over and fix things and just like making it obvious that like her and Jack were having an affair. Now, of course, we know like Jack's a serial cheater, but like it was one of those like public secrets where everyone knew, you know what I mean? But like no one talked about it, you know, it was, everyone pretended they didn't know, but like everyone knew. But with Carol, like openly following Jack around like a lovesick puppy, like she was just like, she was not keeping it on the DL, you know, it was just out in the open. And Carol was just, she was just desperately in love with Jack. She wanted more than anything to convince him to leave Jeanette, which of course he wouldn't. One time she even tried to bribe Jeanette with $1,500 to divorce him. And at that point, you know, Jeanette was just sort of like over Carol, you know, just sort of over it and just wanted to evict her. She told Carol like how ridiculous she looked and that like Jack didn't even love her and that like he was never going to divorce her and that like she didn't have cancer. He used that $10,000 to pay off his van and just like telling her like, girl, you look stupid. All right. Like just stop. Carol actually recorded this conversation and showed it to Jack. I don't know. I guess she thought that like it would get him to leave her and this just infuriated him. And finally, in January of 1980, Jack evicted Carol and her sons from Valero Gardens. But Carol ended up finding another apartment only 3 miles away, and Jack would continue coming over for sex. Only now, he would ask for, like, cash and other favors afterwards now. Like, what? And Carol being a lovesick fool, a gullible lovesick fool, would fall for it all the time and would acquiesce to everything he wanted. And she would also follow him around to all the bars that he was performing at, such as the Little Nashville bar, to try to get his attention. He would promptly ignore her, by the way. Even sometimes, like, leaving with other women, like, and being very obvious about it, kind of just like, all right, Carol, like, I'm not into you. And it is on one of these nights that she follows Jack to the Little Nashville bar that she met Doug. Now, knowing what we know about Doug and knowing what we know about Carol, of course, it took no time at all for Doug to be able to seduce and manipulate Carol to his will. So that night that he met Carol at the bar, he asked for her number, and a couple days later he calls and asks to come over. And so he comes over and he woos the kids, her 2 sons, Chris and David. He woos them and plays with them, hangs out, which, of course, these 2 boys, they are desperate for a male, you know, any type of male role model in their lives. And, you know, he tucks them in and just really wins them over. And that night, him and Carol sleep together. And the next morning, Doug asks Carol if he can move in. Because remember, we know that's what Doug does. He finds older, lonely women to mooch off of. And Carol says yes. Carol says yes. Like, girl, you got 2 young children, and you don't even know this guy. Like, I just can't even. So, yeah, Doug moves in, but he doesn't move into Carol's room. He just kind of, like, sets up his own little corner in the apartment with, like, a cot and his teddy bear named Mozart. And, yeah, he would still go to bars looking for other women to use. And if he found another woman to use, he would go and stay with her until she kicked him to the curb. Sometimes he would even bring other women to Carol's apartment and then ask Carol to sleep on the cot so he can use her bed for sex. And she would! And she would! Like, what? I just don't get it. But Carol, she was under Doug's spell. Under Doug's spell. She wanted to be dominated by Doug, alright? Like, in more ways than one. Like, in the bedroom, you know? She was under his spell. Just like Jack had done, Doug would ask for things and Carol would acquiesce and give him whatever he wanted. He even talked her into buying him and her 25 caliber Raven pistols in May of 1980. Now, during this time, you're probably wondering, well, like, I thought she was in love with Jack. What happened with there? Well, she's still, like, in love with Jack, but she's starting to get kind of tired of his BS and she's starting to gravitate towards Doug, you know. But Jack did still come over infrequently for like sex and favors. Now, of course, Jack and Doug did not like each other. All right, they were both threatened by the other's control over Carol, right? Because like Carol was their cash cow, all right, and each one was a threat to the other. Now, Carol, though, as we know, is very gullible and not all that bright. She thinks that they're fighting over her because they love her, all right? And that's what's happening. And so she's loving the attention, all right? She's loving it. When Doug had moved in, he started telling Carol about his sexual fantasies, his dark sexual fantasies. He told her about his fantasy of kidnapping a young woman, taking her to a country home with a torture chamber, and making her his sex slave. Now, Carol, she always envisioned herself as the slave, okay? Carol is very submissive, all right? And she wanted Doug to dominate her. But, of course, Doug's using her, all right? Doug's not actually attracted to her, doesn't, really like her, he's using her, right? And she was never going to be that to Doug, you know? But in order to indulge his sexual fantasies, because Carol's just under his spell, the two would actually end up sexually abusing an 11-year-old girl who lived in the apartment complex that Carol lived in. She was given the moniker Shannon in court documents. In the book that I read about this case, she was given the name Teresa. I'm just going to call her Shannon because that's where I first came across her. Now, Shannon, like I said, she lived in the same apartment complex as Carol, and she had already been sexually abused by a family friend. She had never told anyone. And yeah, her and Carol became fast friends. They would hang out and share off-color jokes and watch TV together. And yeah, Shannon's mother, who was a very young mother, Jacqueline, she worked at a hospital, right? And so she didn't pay too much attention to the relationship that Carol had with Shannon. She met Carol, and it seemed kosher. I mean, and Carol's a woman, right? Like, your hackles are going to be up with, like, a guy, but they're not going to be as up with a woman, right? And, yeah, they should have been. Because, shortly after, meeting her, Carol began molesting Shannon, who had grown to think that this was a normal thing that adults did to kids, but just no one talked about it. She thought it was normal. I know, isn't that so heartbreaking? And when Carol brought Doug around, she was then incorporated into their sex acts, and they would abuse her. They would all perform oral sex on each other, but Shannon always drew the line at, like, typical sex. So Shannon didn't know a whole lot, but she was aware of this, like, concept of virginity, and she wanted hers intact, all right? So she always drew the line at typical sex. Carol and Doug even photographed some of the abuse that they did to Shannon. They would dress her up in lingerie. Carol would do her makeup. And then, yeah, they would take pictures of the abuse. One picture in particular, I guess, depicts Doug in nothing but a dog collar on all fours, with Shannon in lingerie wearing stiletto heels, and she has the heels on Doug's neck. Now, Shannon would later go on and give interviews about, what she endured and stuff. And she said that she always felt that, like, It seemed like Doug was kind of bummed that, like, they were only playing make-believe in these pictures. You know, they weren't actually doing the stuff. And, like, he really, really wanted to have sex with Shannon, but she always told him no. One time he wanted her to, like, paddle him, but she thought that was just too silly. You know, she thought this was just sort of, like, silly pictures. We're playing dress up, like, it's fine. But yeah, Doug would constantly ask to sleep with her, and she would always say no. Now, one night, when they're doing this, Carol convinces Shannon to take some medicine that will make her drowsy. And so Shannon does, and she ends up passing out. And while she is passed out, Doug begins sexually assaulting her. And when she starts crying out due to the pain, Doug stops. Now, this is where the rationality in Shannon's mind is she never really was threatened by Doug. She almost viewed him as like a puppy dog. And in her mind, she even rationalized it. I was like, oh, see, he's not that bad. Like, I asked him to stop, and he stopped, which... Isn't that so sad? Like, it's just so sad. Like, that's how warped and skewed and traumatized, you know, this girl is like what she thinks is normal. It's just so sad. Now, of course, the dynamic between these three is abuse, right? It's terrible. And remember we said Carol carries feelings of guilt? Well, she eventually started to grow guilty about what her and Doug were doing to Shannon. And so... Get this. This is a trip I'm about to tell you. So she starts to feel guilty about what they're doing to Shannon. And so she decides to bring Shannon to a family therapist with her. Yeah, Carol brings Shannon to a family therapist. The therapist then asks Shannon what she thinks about, you know, carrying on this kind of relationship with two adults. And Shannon said that she didn't mind at all. And get this, so the therapist said that Shannon was well-grounded, emotionally healthy, and it wasn't their place as a therapist to moralize the relationship. And so they was just like, yeah, so you seem cool, so yeah, it's cool. I just don't even know what to say about that. Now, Carol eventually introduced Shannon to Jack, but whereas Shannon thought, you know, like I said, Doug was sort of like puppy dog-like, because, like, you know, he was very eager to please, you know, like he would take Shannon to restaurants and buy her things. He would ask her advice on like what sex workers he should pick up on the strip. And she really enjoyed this, you know, made her feel like an adult, you know, she really liked this. But Jack, she didn't really like Jack. Like, I think Jack like molested her and like groped her, and like she just didn't like it. And she like told Carol, like, I never want to see that guy again. All right. I do not like him. Now, you would think sexually assaulting a child would fulfill Doug's sick needs. But no, his dark fantasies, they didn't end there. According to Carol, Doug constantly brought up killing and murders, and they would always discuss the prevalent murders going on in Los Angeles at the time. In April of, I think, 1980, don't quote me on the year, I think it's April of 1980, Doug would make his first known attempt that we know of making his murder fantasies come true. So one evening in April, he picked up a 22-year-old sex worker named Charlene Anderman. They agreed that Doug would pay her $40 for oral sex, and so she got in the seat and they went to a secluded spot. Doug was in a blue station wagon, which was actually Carol's, surprise, surprise. And when they got to, you know, a little secluded spot, Doug tried to get Charlene to go in the back seat. But she was like, no, I'm good. Like, I think we'll conduct our transaction here in the front. So she leans over to, you know, begin her services, and she, you know, kind of notes in her head, like, oh, great, like, he's kind of small, and he's not even, like, fully aroused. Like, that's annoying, you know. So she begins her work. And mere seconds after she begins, she feels Doug press her head down and then hold a blade to the back of her neck. Charlene says that at this time she went to grab the passenger door handle to get out, but Doug stabbed her hand and then continued stabbing her. So yeah, Unclear if after she feels the blade on her neck, she just like kind of like gets up like instinctively and tries to go to the door, and then that's when he stabs her, or what, like there's a lot of things happening, and this all happens relatively quickly. I'm sure it's hard to remember every detail, but yeah, that's just what all the reports and the sources that I could find said, is that she reached for the handle, he stabbed her hand to stop her, and then he kept stabbing her. Now, at one point, Charlene was able to grab the knife by the blade, all right? And for like 3 to 4 minutes, all right, there's like this stalemate going on between Doug and Charlene, right? She's underneath Doug, holding the blade as he's pressing, he's on top of her, pressing the blade further and further, gravity working with him. And finally, after about 3 or 4 minutes, Doug starts chatting with her. Again, as if this is like a movie or something. Starts chatting with her. He asks her name, and she gives it, and he wonders if if anyone would miss her, if she has anyone that would miss her, and she's like, yeah, suppose I do. And then he said, quote, "You're all wet. What's the matter? Did you wet your pants? Are you scared?" And that's when Charlene responded, quote, "No, mister, that's blood. You're hurting me." And that's when Doug starts laughing. He then says it's pretty obvious that neither one of them was going to let go of the blade, and that is when he starts putting his fingers over Charlene's windpipe and starts trying to suffocate her. As he's suffocating her, he mockingly whispers in her ear, quote, "This is your last round, baby." And when he whispers that, that is when Charlene, I guess it's like that, like that last bit of like, all right, this is do or die time. She just uses that last burst, kicks her legs, and manages to propel herself out of the car while bleeding. Doug immediately takes off, throwing her shoes and jacket out the window, and leaving Charlene bleeding there on the street. And Charlene would go on to survive Doug's attempt. Doug went immediately to Carol's apartment after this failed attempt. And even Carol's sons saw Doug that night, all right? So when Doug came over that night after he attempted to kill Charlene, Chris was in bed, and his bedroom door was cracked. And he said Doug stumbled in, and he was covered in blood, like covered. His denim jacket, even his teeth were covered in blood. And Carol immediately pushes Doug into a bathroom to get him out of sight and tells Chris to go to sleep. I think she sees that he's up and saw. David also saw. I think the boys may have shared a bedroom. And Chris then put his head under the covers and pretended to be asleep. And the next day, Carol told her boys that Doug had just gotten into a motorcycle accident, and that's why he was so bloody. But Chris immediately thought this was weird because he saw Carol washing Doug's bloody knife. What Doug had told Carol was that he was receiving oral sex from a woman when her hitman boyfriend showed up out of nowhere and beat him up. And a few days later, like within a week later, Chris would again see Doug stumble home covered in blood. Now, when Doug first started trolling the Sunset Strip looking for sex workers to kill, remains a little unclear. All right, remains a little unclear. There's a lot about Doug that remains a little unclear. Because again, both Doug and Carol are pathological liars. There are theories that Doug had been killing for a while. There is thought that he went to strangulation before going to stabbing, before graduating to what he will use in all the murders that we will be discussing, a gun. Now, I don't know if it's based off of like that attempted attack on Charlene, that attempted murder attack on Charlene. Remember when the stabbing wasn't working? He went to suffocation, so not sure. But we do know. Now, there may be more, maybe earlier victims, but like the first victim that we are aware of was a teenage sex worker named Marnette Comer. And so let's talk a little bit about Marnette. Marnette Carey Comer was the second of 5 children, and she was born May 21st, 1963. Her parents were Ellen and Gerald Comer. Now, Myrnette's older sister, Sabra, which I love that name, by the way, Sabra, isn't that super pretty? Myrnette's older sister, Sabra, she was already a sex worker who worked the Sunset Strip. And Myrnette, she was from Sacramento, and almost as soon as she was a teenager, Myrnette became a sex worker. She ran away so much and got in trouble for being a sex worker so much that she ended up in a juvenile delinquent home for girls. And in January of 1980, her mother comes to pick Myrnette up for a dentist appointment, and then they were going to go shopping afterwards. And Myrnette is left alone for a very brief period at the dentist's office, and she takes this opportunity to slip out the window. And sadly, this would be the last time that Myrnette's mother would see her. On May 21st, her 17th birthday, Myrnette actually did call home, just to let them know that, she was still alive, and one of her younger sisters answered, and she was begging for Myrnette to come home, but Myrnette was insistent on being out and about and being independent and being a sex worker. Supposedly, even Myrnette's older sister, Sabra, was worried for her sister, but Myrnette assured her that, no, I work with, a group of girls, and we have each other's back, we take precautions, and all of that. Allegedly, one night, Myrnette was talking to Sabra, and she was talking about how she possibly maybe didn't want to do sex work anymore. Maybe she wanted to go back and get her GED. Now, no one, despite her precautions, no one saw who picked Myrnette up on May 31st, 1980. She was last seen wearing a pink t-shirt that read Daddy's Girl on it. And no one saw who picked her up that night, but we know who picked her up that night. It was Doug. And that would be his first, that we know of, victim. Again, there could be more. There could be earlier ones in Myrnette, but she is just the first known that we know of thus far. Doug would then go on to murder teenage stepsisters, 16-year-old Cynthia Leigh Chandler, and 15-year-old Gina Morano. And he would murder these stepsisters on June 11th. So, picked up Myrnette May 31st, he picks up Gina and Cynthia and kills them on June 11th. So, not a lot of rest in between. Gina was born May 5th, 1965 in Brooklyn, New York, and Cynthia February 24th, 1964 in Los Angeles. Now, the girls, they were super close, all right? They were like best friends. They may as well have been like blood sisters. They were that close. When Gina's father and Cynthia's mothers got together, they moved the family to Huntington Beach, and yeah, Gina and Cynthia just took an instant liking to each other, and the two quickly grew close. Now, the girls, they were both beautiful, both very smart, both doing very well in school, and like with a lot in their lives, they like a lot of teenagers their age, they also had their rebellious streak. But since they're overachievers, the rebellious streak was, of course, really out there. They would constantly run away. They wanted independence. They wanted to live on their own. And yeah, they would constantly run away from home to, go into LA and just, walk the Sunset Strip, walk the beaches, hang out, and just live their lives. And they would often hitchhike into the city, and that's how they would get around. And they would usually stick to the major freeways where the chances of getting a ride were much, much greater. And unfortunately, on June 11th, one of the rides they accepted was from Doug. After shooting Cynthia and Gina in the head, Doug then took the girls to like a storage unit, / shed that he had. And there, he would do terrible, terrible things. He threw them on the floor and then desecrated them. He performed necrophilia on Cynthia's body and sodomized Gina's body. He then had his fun posing the bodies, posing the girls doing things to each other, and then taking Polaroids of it. And when he was done, he discarded their bodies from his car. Yeah, just on the side of the road. I know. No words. Now, the very next day, on June 12th, 1980, Cynthia and Gina's bodies were discovered. They were discovered by a Caltrans worker named Francisco Vasquez. He was picking up trash near Forest Lawn Drive Cemetery, and he was by an on-ramp for the Ventura Freeway, and he was cleaning trash along there, and that's when he discovered Cynthia and Gina's discarded bodies. Now, it looked to investigators, immediately by looking at the scene, that it looked like the girls had been killed elsewhere and then tossed from a moving vehicle, where they rolled down the incline from the freeway, from the road, from where they were tossed, and then came to rest where Francisco had found them. Now, though they hadn't been dead for very long, because this is summer and it's the LA heat, their bodies were already bloated and starting to decompose due to being left out in the heat. Gina was found laying face down with Cynthia a few feet away. Gina was partially clothed. She was wearing a red tube top that had been pulled down to her waist. Cynthia was wearing a pink jumpsuit that had been cut up the leg all the way to the crotch with some sort of sharp instrument. And they found blood and what they thought was motor oil on her jumpsuit as well. Neither of the girls were wearing underwear. Gina had died from her gunshot to the head, while Cynthia had been shot both in the chest and head, both at close range, and neither of them had ID on them. And the way that their bodies were so casually discarded, like just so nonchalantly thrown from a busy freeway near a very busy, like, huge cemetery, it immediately told investigators that they were dealing with a pretty seasoned killer. Like, this was not a newbie. This was not someone who was new to this. Now, Cynthia and Gina's parents had actually been looking for their daughters the day that their bodies were found. Gina's father said that he had last spoken to his daughter about like a week or two prior, but he hadn't heard from either of the girls since. Now, right before they had been murdered, the girls had actually been at a party at a mansion in Beverly Hills. And while at this party, they met a 19-year-old named Mindy Cohen. Now, Mindy was your stereotypical trust fund baby. Her daddy was super rich, and the mansion that they were partying at was her boyfriend. Her 38-year-old lawyer boyfriend named Mark Gottman. Now, Mark, he threw your stereotypical Hollywood sex and drug-fueled, parties at his mansion. Him and his buddy Richie. Richie had his little chauffeur, his own little Alfred, who they would send out to troll the LA streets and find them young, pretty girls to party with. And one of these evenings, this chauffeur had brought Cynthia and Gina, and that's how they had come to the party and had met Mindy and started talking to her. Now, Mindy really liked the girls. She thought it was really fascinating that they were so young and already living on their own. She learned that, they were living on their own. They had jobs at Taco Bell. And Mindy was just very impressed, all right? Because, she knew that she was like a trust fund baby. And she's like, there's no way that I could do that. Like, wow, I'm so envious of you girls. Now, unbeknownst to Mindy, though, the girls were starting to find out that it wasn't all glitz and glamour when you're living on your own. A few days prior to them meeting Mindy, Gina had actually been drugged and sexually assaulted at a party. But they were making it seem to Mindy that they were very happy living on their own, So, Mindy ended up giving the girls her phone number, and Gina wrote it on a piece of paper. Gina took the paper and put it in her trusty red address book, all right? Now, this address book is something that Gina always carried with her, always. It was not found at the scene where her body was found, and to this day, it has never been found. But wait, there's more. There's more. So, Mindy would later inform the police that she had gotten a phone call just mere days after Cynthia and Gina's murder from a supposed detective. This detective called Mindy and said that her name and number had been found at the crime scene of the girls' bodies, and that her name and number had been found in Gina's red address book. And this detective wanted Mindy to come down to the station and talk. Now, Mindy told the detective that at the moment she was watching her siblings while her parents were out of town, but she'd like to help any way that she could. And so the detective started talking to her on the phone. He asked Mindy if he was aware that Gina and Cynthia were sex workers, which she was not. And as the conversation progressed, Mindy thought it was just weird the way he was, like, talking about them being sex workers, as if, like, there was something wrong with it, as if, like, he wanted Mindy to be, like, morally outraged that they were sex workers and had, like, gotten what was coming to them. Like, this was the vibe Mindy was getting. And she also was noting that, hey, man, it's kind of strange, like, This detective, I don't know, man, it seems like he's giving an awful lot of information about an ongoing murder investigation. And so, after they hung up, Mindy started stewing on the conversation a bit, and yeah, it just wasn't sitting right with her. So she called Mark, her boyfriend, and told him what had happened. Mark then turned around and contacted the LAPD, who informed him that, like, they had no idea who Mindy was, that she was connected to the girls in whatever way. They had no idea who she was, what was going on. They're like, yeah, not us. And they told Mark to just chalk it up to a crank call. Mindy would end up receiving another call from this supposed detective later on. This one would be more menacing and threatening in nature, like threatening Mindy that he would do what he did to Gina and Cynthia to her. But there's even more. Mindy wasn't the only person with a connection to Cynthia and Gina who got a mysterious phone call. So a woman named Lori Briggs, I hope that's how you pronounce her last name, Lori receives a phone call from a detective, and he tells Lori, like, hey, your husband Henry, his business card was found with Gina's body, and the detective wanted to talk to her husband. Henry ran a moving company with his brother. And yeah, when Lori was like, oh my God, like, yeah, do you need him to, like, come down and talk to the station? He's not here right now. This detective was like, oh, you know what? We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch. And they never called back. When Lori informed Henry about this phone call, he's like, oh yeah, that's so weird. Yeah, just the other day I saw these two young girls hitchhiking on the freeway. And he was, like, really worried for them, because Cynthia and Gina, they were super young. They were 15 and 16 years old. They were babies. And he saw them hitchhiking on the freeway. And he was in the company truck with an employee at the time. And he pulled over and offered them a ride. And when he dropped them off, he was like, hey, like, it's really dangerous to hitchhike, Like, this is a dangerous city for two young girls. And he gave them his business card and was like, look, if you need, like, any, like, a ride or any help or anything, like, here's my business card. Like, please call me. Please. Like, it's brutal out there, And yeah, that's how Gina had his business card. And once again, when Henry called the LAPD to, try to get in touch with this detective, again, they had no idea who he was or, like, that he had any connection to Cynthia or Gina. And like with Mindy, they told him to chalk it up to, like, a crank call. Now, eventually, I'm pretty sure Henry and Mindy would be connected to the murders, like, much later on. This was just, like, initially what happened, like, in a days, like, immediately preceding the discovery of their bodies. Now, a couple of days after Cynthia and Gina's bodies were discovered on June 14th, Carol called the police, all right? Carol called the police. Like, what is she gonna do? She called the police under the name of Betsy, and she told them that she knew who had killed Cynthia and Gina, all right? And that's what she was calling about. But the call was disconnected. She just gave her name and reason for the call before she hung up. And then she called back, I think, like 2 hours later. So yeah, she called back about, like, 2 hours later, this time telling them to call her Claudia, before saying, oh, you know what? Never mind. Don't call me that either, because the killer, aka my lover, will be able to trace that moniker to me too. She said her lover, the killer, killed Gina and Cynthia, told her about it, and told her that they were not his first kills. Now, the whole conversation that Carol, Betsy/Claudia, was having with the police was very sporadic and all over the place. The cops just didn't know what to make of Carol, all right? Like, they thought it was definitely someone who was deeply mentally unstable and deeply troubled. But again, like, it's a murder case, right? So you got to take any lead that you get. And so they were trying to keep Carol on the line and, like, trying to get her to give them some, relevant, useful information. But Carol doesn't really give them anything much. And then, in the middle of the conversation, an operator disconnected the call. I don't know how that happens or what, but yeah, the operator accidentally disconnected the call, and Carol does not call back. Doug had come home the night he had murdered Gina and Cynthia and had told Carol what he had done. And he had told her that they were not his first kills. And though she had made those anonymous phone calls to police and said that she wanted to turn in the killer, Carol did nothing else to turn Doug in. And in fact, after her trademark flip-flopping, because Carol can never make up her mind, Carol decides that she wants to join Doug. All right, she wants to be a killer like Doug, because she wants to do anything Doug wants, dude. She wants to satisfy any fantasy that he has. And on June 20th, 1980, so barely over a week since he had murdered Gina and Cynthia, Doug and Carol head out to troll the Sunset Strip for what is to be Carol's first victim. All right, that was the goal. They found a sex worker who said her name was Kathy, and they found her on Highland Avenue in Hollywood. Now, the plan was for Kathy to give Doug oral sex, and as she was doing it, Carol was to shoot her in the head. So they pick up Kathy, she slides into the passenger seat, Doug is driving, and Carol is sitting in the back seat with her Raven pistol hidden from view. Now, Carol said that when the moment came, she couldn't bring herself to do it. She could not bring herself to pull the trigger. And so Doug shot Kathy instead. And all the while, like, belittling Carol, insulting her, telling her she was worthless, and this, that, and the other. And he, after shooting Kathy and killing her, he drives off. They get onto the Hollywood freeway and start driving. And as they're driving, Carol undresses Kathy's body. And they drove until they came to a gravel road, and then they discarded Kathy's body. They just dumped her body under some bushes. Now, one day, in late June of 1980, Carol, she's dropping some stuff off at an apartment that her and Doug are going to be sharing, all right? They're moving in. She's dropping some stuff off, and she sees a bag in the freezer, and she asks Doug what it is, and he gets it out, and he says, "Oh, it's a human head," and he proceeds to pull out a human head by the hair and start swinging it around. It was the head of a very thin blonde woman. Doug told Carol that he had taken the head in the shower and had used the mouth to satisfy himself, and had kept it in the freezer in between him using it. And when in just a couple of days, when he'd had his fun, they wanted to discard the head. Carol and Doug were talking about, like, some of the most, like, outlandish, headline-grabbing ways to discard this head. And to that end, Carol decided to put makeup on the head, all right? So she put makeup on the head. They thought this would, just be a very sensational thing that media would pick up on because they really wanted attention. But then Doug got scared that they would be leaving fingerprints in the makeup, and so he made Carol wash the head. They eventually got a small handmade, like, pine wooden box, wrapped the head in a t-shirt, and put it in the box. And they then dumped the box in an alley. On June 23rd, so let's get into a little bit about who that head belonged to, all right? So on June 23rd, 20-year-old sex worker Exie LaFay Wilson's torso was found in a dumpster in Burbank. The body of her friend and fellow sex worker, Karen Lee Jones, was found on the road not far away. So casually discarded by the road that at first investigators thought she was a victim of a hit and run. And then Exie's body had been found in, like, a restaurant plaza like right next to the road, in a dumpster behind a restaurant. The amount of blood found at the scene where Exie's body was staggering to investigators. The amount of blood told investigators that Exie's head was removed from her body when her heart was still beating. So let's get a little bit into Exie. Exie was born August 17th, 1959 in Perryville, Arkansas. Her parents were Delbert and Zelma Wilson, but Delbert died when Exie was very young, and so Zelma struggled to raise her kids on her own. And as a result, Exie barely graduated high school. She was barely literate, was not encouraged to go to college, which I just think is sad. This is like, okay, college isn't for everyone, but like, it's just so sad that she wasn't encouraged to do anything else. She was like a maid, and she worked as a waitress, and she met a man named Derek Albright, and Derek was a pimp. Now, whether it was to please Derek, whether it was to make more money, we don't know. We just know that after meeting Derek, Exie is talked into doing sex work. On June 12th, the day that Cynthia and Gina's bodies were discovered, Exie had actually called her mother and was telling her that she actually wanted to get out of the sex working game. She was kind of getting tired of it, She was tired of getting arrested, tired of the lifestyle, tired of Derek, and her client pool was drying up anyway because the police were really coming down hard on sex workers in the area. She also told her mother that Derek wanted to take his girls out west to LA and work them there, but Exie didn't really want to go. On the last phone call that Exie's mother had with her, Derek actually grabbed the phone out of Exie's hand, told Zelma to stay out of his business. Like, oh, hell no, that's her mother. Like, oh, hell no, that is exactly her business. And Exie was able to say goodbye to her mother before Derek hung up the phone. And that was the last time her mother talked to her. And on June 15th, Exie and Derek, along with 2 other women, set out west from Arkansas to LA. He brought another couple of girls with him, a girl named Sharon, and a 24-year-old woman named Karen Lee Jones. Now, there's not a whole lot known about Karen. Her family was very private and very hush-hush when, all this was going down. So we don't know a whole lot. So we know some things. We know that she was born February 23rd, 1956 in Lakehurst, New Jersey. And she had 3 sisters. Now, Karen and Exie, they would end up becoming very, very good friends. They were like physical opposites. So Exie was like this rail-thin blonde, where Karen was sort of like a heavier set brunette, but she was heavier set because she was pregnant. In fact, the whole reason Karen was even going to be a sex worker was to provide for her unborn son. Karen had been going to college on a scholarship when she got pregnant, and having nowhere and no one to turn to, she couldn't continue her education and found herself at a battered woman shelter, and that's where she met Derek, who laid the same line, telling her how much money she could make as a sex worker. Now, again, little confused on Karen's situation. I don't know why she couldn't continue her education. I don't know why she couldn't turn to her family. I know I read in newspaper reports when her body was discovered, they said that her family had her son. So I'm also unclear on whether she had just given birth when she left Arkansas for LA or what. Like I said, there's not a lot known about Karen, because her family was very, hushed and private and reserved during all this. So the group made it from Arkansas to California in about 4 days, and after settling in for a couple days, Exie, Karen, and the other girls set to work. Now, usually how it would go down is they would be in constant contact with Derek throughout the day, just calling him and letting him know hey, I'm moving to this area or this, that, and the other. And on the last day that they would be seen alive, Karen calls Derek and lets him know that she's going to head towards a Sunset Strip to work because a cop had issued her a warning in the area that she was currently in. Now, as Karen is on the phone with Derek, letting him know, Exie is seen across the street, trying to work. And yeah, these would be the last 2 confirmed sightings of Exie and Karen alive. So after disposing of Exie's head in that pine box, her head was found just a few days later on June 27th in Studio City, California. A man named Jonathan Caravillo had stumbled upon the box. He had been working all night, and he came to his normal parking spot that he normally parked at, and he saw a pine box, and it's like a nice looking box. And he was like, oh, maybe there's something nice in there. And so he opens the box, and at first he thinks it's just clothes, so he peels away layers of clothing and is, of course, horrified and traumatized to find Exie's head. Her head had been wrapped in a bright pink t-shirt that read Daddy's Girl on it. Yeah, Marnette's shirt. Now, the discovery of Exie's head, plus the discovery of Gina and Cynthia's bodies, I think Kathy may have been discovered at this point. There's a few Jane Does that were discovered as well that are thought to be attributed to Doug and Carol, so that's why I can't remember. I know Gina and Cynthia, Exie and Karen, those were all discovered. I can't remember if there were other bodies discovered, but at this point, once Exie's head is discovered, LAPD is in full overdrive, alright? They are trying to hunt the Sunset Strip Killer, or sometimes the media was calling them the Sunset Strip Slayer, and they were on full alert. They held multiple press conferences, trying to get word out about these killers, trying to get word out that it was, it wasn't safe for sex workers in the best of time, but now that there was an actual killer out searching for them on the Sunset Strip. They were also warning hitchhikers and any pedestrians who were walking along the Sunset Strip that, you could be a potential target. LAPD also, had their first female detective team during this case, with detectives Peggy York and Helen Kidder assigned to the case. And on June 30th, Marnette was finally discovered. Her mummified remains were found by two hikers who were hiking along the Golden State Freeway near Sylmar. I also heard it was a hunter, but regardless, she was stumbled upon by people walking there. There was an old mattress, and they saw some blonde hair sticking out from underneath it. And, underneath it, they discovered the mummified remains of Marnette's body. Her body had been left to the elements, and so it was badly decomposed. Like I said, it was mummified. They couldn't even tell right off the bat if it was a male or female body that they had found. She was shot and gutted with a crude attempt at organ removal, although investigators thought that this was more in an effort to speed up decomposition, and it wasn't anything twisted or to satisfy some weird bloodlust or something. And her death was very eerily similar to Cynthia and Gina and Karen and Exie, and they had all been killed with a .25 caliber pistol, specifically a .25 caliber Raven gun. So that was their only lead. In these cases, they all came from the same gun. And so police looked up a list of all of the .25 caliber Raven guns in the area in LA, and only 30 of those guns had actually been sold in LA, so not a whole lot. And two Raven handguns, similar in every way except for one of them had a chrome plating where the other had silver, had been sold to a woman named Carol Bundy. But, police aren't looking for a woman, so they ignore this lead. Ignore it. Now, throughout all of this, by the end of July of 1980, Carol, who is already, not exactly playing with a full deck on the best of times, she is losing it. She's unraveling hard. Her behavior at work, which was always a little odd, was very erratic, and she was acting and saying very strange things that, coworkers actively avoided, talking or being with her at all. She had even called up her old friend Richard and had told him that her boyfriend, her lover, was the Sunset Strip Killer, and that she was scared she was going to be next due to what she knew. And Richard was like, well, why don't you get out of there? That sounds serious. Call the authorities. And Carol was like, no. I'm the only one that can stop him. Okay. I'm the only one that can handle this. And then she hung up on Richard, and she called him back later and told him oh, you know what? Everything I said, that was all made up. That was for a story that I'm writing. But Richard, didn't believe her. Carol had also reportedly told Jack about what her and Doug had been doing. Now, Jack didn't really seem to believe her, And this upset Carol, so, like, I guess she dragged Jack to the trunk of her car and, like, showed him proof that she wasn't, like, messing around. I'm unclear as to what she showed him, super unclear. But Jack started taking her a little more seriously and was like, well, okay, if this is, like, for real and this is really happening, well, you need to, like, go to the authorities. And then Carol started getting paranoid that Jack was going to turn her and Doug in to the cops. And that's when she decided that Jack needed to die. All right. And so she was going to kill him. She was going to lure him to his van under the guise of sex. All right. And so that was the plan. So she waited for him at the little Nashville bar one evening, where he promptly left with another woman. They left in his van and they came back later, which of course has upset Carol. And when they came back, tired of waiting, Carol interrupted them and the other woman left. And that's when Carol, promising Jack sex, is just like, will you talk to me now? And so, like, Jack's like, yeah, fine. So they leave in his van. They find a nice little quiet, dark, neighborhood street or whatever to park and talk. But Jack, of course, he's only interested in sex. And so he immediately goes to the back of his van. Now, this was very important to Jack, all right? As one of his most prized possessions. Is where he had a majority of his liaisons. It's where he kept his, like, homemade pornography and sex toys and all that other stuff. And so, yeah, they park and Jack immediately unzips his pants and not really wanting to listen to Carol. So Carol's like, fine, whatever. And so she starts giving Jack a hand job from behind. And then she starts giving him a rim job. Now, as she is doing these things, she takes out her pistol and shoots Jack in the head twice, killing him. Carol then took out a knife and proceeded to stab Jack. She stabbed him in the back 9 times, cursing his name the whole time. She even slashed and stabbed at his buttocks, saying that he always wanted a piece of ass and now she was going to take a piece of his. Jack was also known to force women into sodomy and then cleaning himself off in their mouths. And so Carol was also, shouting like, oh, how do you like something shoved up your ass, while she's like stabbing him repeatedly over and over in the buttocks. Now, again, because Carol's a pathological liar, it should be noted that the reasons she gives for killing Jack, they vary as the years go by. So, like, yeah, it was, first she was scared that he was going to turn them in. And then, she was trying to say like, oh, well, he wanted me to bring him Shannon, and that really, like, set her off. So, yeah, Carol's all over the place. But we do know that she did shoot him and stab him. And after she was done, she then got paranoid that the cops were going to be able to take the bullets from his head and trace them back to her. And so that's when she decides she needs to decapitate him. And she does. She decapitates Jack's head. She puts it in a plastic bag and puts it in the car. And when she's done, she calls up Doug and she says, hey, I'm going to be bringing Jack over. And Doug, as we know, doesn't really like Jack, and he gets kind of mad. And that's when she's like, oh, no, you misunderstand. I'm bringing Jack's head. And that's when she tells Doug what she has done. And that's when Doug tells her to come over. And after driving around for a while and discussing what to do with Jack's head, they ultimately dispose of it in a dumpster somewhere. And to this day, Jack's head has never been found. Jack's body was discovered, though, on August 9th. The neighbors in the Van Nuys neighborhood where Jack's van had been parked, they called the police because a really foul odor was coming from Jack's van. And as we know what that was. Investigators find Jack's decapitated body inside of his van, and they also find a spent shell casing that Carol had missed. Now, not long after killing Jack, Carol, she really loses it, all right? She is losing it hard, all right? On August 11th, just 2 days after Jack's body is found, she walks into work and tells the head nurse that she's going to be resigning, all right? She was going to walk out. Her friend Jack, he was murdered All right, he didn't just die mysteriously, he was murdered. And she said that her boyfriend, Doug, had committed the Sunset Strip slayings. Now, Carol supposedly said, quote, "I can't take it anymore. I'm supposed to save lives, not take them." And now, people at Carol's job, they knew Carol. She liked to shock people. You know, like I said, Carol's a pathological liar and she likes attention, so she would always say outlandish things. But something about the way Carol was, like how serious she was, how adamant she was, just really rubbed them the wrong way. So her supervisor wasted no time in calling the cops. And now what happens next is like straight up from a movie. It's so silly. Supervisor calls the cops, lets them know, like, hey, I think I've got the Sunset Strip killer here, you know? So, of course, all hands on deck, right? Hospital is locked down. Carol ends up walking out, and get this. So this is how, right? So they have the hospital on lockdown, right? As the police are riding up in the elevator to get to where Carol's workstation is, Carol is coming down at that exact same moment in the elevator. And she had changed into her street clothes before leaving, so she was able to just walk right out of the hospital. Yeah, I just, like, that's so wild to me. Like, it's straight up out of a movie. She went home and was actually on the police with several different police stations because she was trying to turn her and Doug in. And she actually couldn't get through to several police stations. She was, like, on hold and stuff. So she's, like, on the phone with police stations when the cops, of course, discovering she's not in the hospital, they're going to go to the next location. Okay, maybe she's at home. And so they have her building surrounded when she's on the phone to different police departments trying to confess. The police also arrived at Doug's workplace and placed him in custody. Now, Doug was very, like, cocky and casual and relaxed when they picked him up. Like, cause he just thinks he's so slick, you know? He thinks there's nothing he can do that, you know, he can get away with whatever he wants, you know? But when he is then driven by the apartment complex, you know, that he shared with Carol and sees all the police activity, that's when Dougie starts getting really nervous. And he should be, because inside that apartment building at that very moment, Carol is just going from room to room, just like gathering evidence and like shoving it in investigators' like hands, like, oh yeah, you know, she's just like, oh, here, take this. It's a bullet from one of the murders. Oh, here, take this. I think this was clothing from one of the victims. Oh, here's some of the girls' underwear. And just like pressing this stuff into police's hands. And they're just like, what? Carol also showed police the photographs of the sexual abuse they did to Shannon. And once at the station, Carol, she was singing. She was talking about anything and everything and just going on in great detail. She said, quote, "I don't know if you guys have ever in your life shot anybody, but it's really fun to do. It sounds terrible, but it is." Carol said that they had kept Exy's head in the freezer and that Doug had used it to perform necrophilia. Carol said, quote, "Where I had my fun was with the makeup. I was making her over like a big Barbie doll." She said this to investigators about Exy's head and what she did to it. Police also eventually found the 2 Raven pistols that belonged to Doug and Carol. Doug had attempted to stash them at the Jurgens Corporation where he worked, and an employee had stumbled upon them. And all the bullets from the crime scenes, except for Jack's, all the bullets matched to Doug's gun. Doug, however, remember, we know Doug. He doesn't take responsibility. That's not Dougie Clark. Doug was denying everything. He actually pointed the finger at Carol and Jack and said that they were, in fact, the Sunset Strip killers. However, Jeanette had alibied Jack for 2 of the murders, and Jack's shoe size was much too small to match the prints that were found at some of the crime scenes. And then when confronted with those photos of him and Shannon, Doug tried to blame it all on Shannon. Classic, right? Classic. He tried to say that 11-year-old Shannon was a seductress and had seduced him. Yeah. Doug would ultimately end up being charged with 6 cases of first-degree premeditated murder for the murders of Marnette, Gina, Cynthia, Exy, Karen, and Kathy. Again, I forget when Kathy's body is found. Like, let me get into it. So let me try to keep this straight. So what really ultimately sucks about this case and all of the cases is that we will never 100% know for sure what happened, because both Doug and Carol, they're pathological liars. And you know how hard it is to trust these kinds of people with anything they say. All three players in this case are pathological liars. Jack was also a liar, plus he's dead now, so we can't get his say on anything. And we don't know for sure if any of the necrophilia acts took place, and some people even think that if they did take place, Carol herself may have performed them. Because that's something that's a great debate in this case, is how dim is Carol? Some people think that, yeah, she's just kind of like a dumb, gullible fool, while others think that she's more clever and manipulative than she lets on, that she kind of puts on this persona, you know. Now, Carol would ultimately be given a deal where the death penalty would be taken off the table in exchange for what she had to say, and she flip-flopped a few times, as Carol does, before she finally agreed to testify against Doug. Now, Carol's testimony was much like Carol herself. It was unreliable, sporadic, it kind of went everywhere, it constantly changed, it was just all over the place. Now, Carol claimed Doug had performed necrophilia, right, with Exy's head, and they had found semen in Exy's throat, and it was blood typed, because remember, DNA testing wasn't really a thing, so it was blood typed as a mixing of A and O types, which prosecutors theorized could be a mixing of Exy and Doug's DNA, because those are their types. But other things, Carol said, kind of like there was really nothing to corroborate. Places that Carol said that she had helped Doug clean up blood from where he had killed Gina and Cynthia, those places were tested for blood and there was nothing found. And also, another interesting thing to note is not only did Carol and Doug have matching guns, Jack also had a pair of guns that I guess used the exact same bullets that these Raven pistols used. Now, whether due to maliciousness or incompetence or what, apparently those guns of Jack's went missing in the chain of evidence and they remain lost to this day, so no testing could be done from Jack's gun to rule out his gun being involved in the Sunset Strip killings. However, other things did line up with what Carol had to say and did point the finger at Doug. They matched some footprints, like I said, found at some of the scenes to Doug's boots that he was wearing when he was arrested, by the way. They also did search Doug's storage shed, and they did find blood and other forensic evidence that backed up other things of what Carol said. So that's the trouble with Carol and with pathological liars in general, right? They take like some truth and they spin a bunch of lies around it. So even though some things she said turned out not to be true, there were also quite a lot of other things that they found that did corroborate what she was saying. The photograph album of Doug and Shannon was actually inadmissible in court due to some legal technicality as to how it was obtained. And so Doug never had to answer for his assault on Shannon, even though Shannon would go on to testify against Doug. She was always worried in the back of her mind that maybe those sex workers that she had helped Doug pick out, she was like, oh my God, was one of them the victims? Did I help him pick out a victim, And that always weighed on her. And so she testified against Doug. Mindy and Lori would also end up testifying. They identified Doug's voice as the voice who had called them and said that they had been an LAPD detective. They identified his voice through a vocal recording lineup and testified that it was in fact Doug. And on August 26th, 1980, another body was found, thought to be linked to Doug. She was, at first, considered a Jane Doe. There was no identification. And is actually unidentified to this day. She was found in Newhall. It is thought that this could potentially be Kathy, the sex worker that was supposed to be Carol's first victim. It is thought that it might be Kathy. And there are actually a few Jane Does, like I said earlier, that were found that are thought to be attributed to Doug and Carol, including 2 Jane Does that were found in Valencia, California. And to this day, all 3 of these Jane Does remain unidentified. And now Doug's trial, it finally began in October of 1982. So that's why I couldn't remember when he was charged with the first-degree murder cases. I couldn't remember if they had included Kathy's in that. Because when, her body was discovered, what is thought to be her body was discovered, they were in the middle of Doug's trial. All of that was like getting taken care of in court and whatnot. So I believe he was eventually charged with that Jane Doe, with the Newhall Jane Doe's death. And again, it is theorized to be that of Kathy. We still do not know to this day for sure. But yeah, so Doug's trial finally began in October of 1982, and Doug actually felt very confident. Right? He felt very confident that he was going to be acquitted. He thought that all he had to do was give the jury just a little bit of reasonable doubt, poke holes in Carol's testimony, and just, lay on his Dougie Clark charm, and he thought he had this in the bag. He even had witnesses that he said claimed that would give him alibis for some of the murders. He also claimed to have canceled checks and receipts to show where he was, and he was nowhere in the vicinity of where the murders had occurred. However, these checks could never be verified. So he had receipts for written checks, but they could never be verified that they were cashed. The supposed dancer they were written to never came forward. And the gas receipts that he showed, they were for one of his girlfriend's cars, not even his car. And so it's dude, this doesn't prove anything. What are you doing? There were even letters that were found that showed Doug was trying to convince these witnesses, which were mostly old girlfriends who still had a thing for Doug because they were going to agree to give him an alibi. The prosecution also presented letters that showed Doug had written out how he was going to get out of the situation and how he was going to use the legal system and the justice system and use all these legal manipulations. And it showed a lot of the tricks that Doug had been showing up to this point because he used every trick he could to try to delay his case. Doug's behavior in court too also did him no favors. My lord, when you read about this, it's really amazing. This was supposed to be a grown-ass man in court fighting for his life. He's on trial for 6 cases of first-degree premeditated murder. And yeah, he was just a child. He would name call, he argued with the judge, he threw temper tantrums, he screamed, he cussed. He went through several defense attorneys, always saying that they were inept, before finally fighting to represent himself, even though he still had to have co-counsel, in the reserves, And the prosecution, even the judge himself, they saw right through Doug's BS. They knew he was just trying to make a whole mockery of the justice system, of the legal system, and he was just trying anything he could to get out of these charges. And yeah, dude, the case against Doug, it was very, very strong. And Doug just tried any which way to get the case thrown out, to get it delayed. And he even offered for the victims' families to come talk to him in jail to get his side of things. The jury took 5 days to convict Doug Clark on all charges in January of 1983. They felt, though she was pathetic and maybe a tad reliable, Carol overall was a reliable witness, and they thought she was just one of many women that Doug had manipulated and used. Doug's parents and siblings, aside from his brother Walter, stood behind Doug. Stood behind him. They claimed he was innocent. Oh yes, because little Dougie couldn't do anything wrong, right? Like I said, Walter was the only one of the family to go against Doug. He totally thought Doug was manipulative and cold enough to do it. And Walter went on later to explain how he always felt like he was the black sheep of the family. And he always thought he was some sort of crazy anomaly because he saw through Doug's BS, but Doug had the whole family under his spell, and he He never got Walter, though, you know? Blanche, Doug's mother, even warned Walter, quote, not to divulge any family secrets when the family had to talk with some psychiatrists. So during the sentencing portion of Doug's trial, they were trying to, you know, figure out, like, okay, how, like, what's the punishment here? You know, is there anything in his past that it could explain why he did the things that he did? Was he abused, trauma, you know, stuff like that? And so part of trying to figure that out involved psychiatrists sitting down with the Clark family and talking about it. And the psychiatrists even testified, they're like, oh yeah, that family did not tell us everything. The parents are clearly hiding something. We don't know what or why, but yeah, the family is clearly hiding something. It's like, gee, I wonder why Doug ended up being such a cold sociopath. Maybe mommy and daddy, making excuses for him his whole life probably didn't do him any favors. During sentencing in February, a doctor, Dr. Gloria E. Keyes, she testified at a sentencing. She had sat down with Doug for about 100 hours, and she said that Doug was a narcissist with delusions of grandeur by putting others down. She said he had antisocial personality traits, low self-esteem, psychosexual disorder, and paranoia. Now, Doug insisted on cross-examining her against his co-counsel's advice, but it was, you know, part of his right since he was representing himself. And apparently during this cross-examination, he just proved Dr. Keyes all kinds of right. All kinds of right, just like in plain view. Doug was ultimately sentenced to death via the gas chamber and was sent to death row at San Quentin Prison, where he actually sits to this day on death row. On May 2nd, 1983, Carol withdrew her not guilty by reason of insanity defense. She was, again, flip-flopping on whether to go to trial or not, and she at first was going to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. But yeah, with that plea deal that she got for her testimony and taking the death penalty off the table, she went ahead and took that deal and was sentenced to 2 consecutive 25 years to life sentences. In court, Carol called herself a, quote, reluctant partner who had been under the influence of a, quote, maniac. She said, quote, it was a fantasy that got out of control. Now, like I said earlier, there are many believe that Carol is just as sadistic as Doug. Journalist Mark McNamara, he interviewed Carol, spent some time with her in jail, and he thought that she seemed motivated by, quote, true sociopathology, as well as the desire to manipulate people. Carol was colder, darker, less sympathetic, more cowardly, yet more refined, and perhaps more clever. Author Louise Farr, she also thinks the same of Doug. She spent a lot of time with Doug, and she actually wrote the book that I actually read about this case, The Sunset Murders. Good, detailed book about the case. Just be warned, I had to take this in many, many sittings. It is rough. It goes into detail about this case, like more detail than I did. Good read, just, maybe take it in small doses. But yeah, Louise Farr, she spent some time with Doug, and like I said, she kind of felt the same way about Doug. She found him equally disturbing, especially like his narcissism. Apparently, when she interviewed Doug, he actually expressed annoyance. He was like super annoyed and jealous and PO'd that the Hillside Strangler, who he was locked up with, I forgot which one, they were getting more press attention than he was. And he was very upset about this. Yeah. Now, Carol Bundy would end up dying of heart failure and complications from diabetes on December 9th, 2003. Up until her death, Carol was tormented behind bars. She was nearly blind from the diabetes, and other inmates would often physically assault her. She definitely had a slow, agonizing, torturous death. She had no friends in prison. Doug, to this day, now in his mid-70s, still maintains his innocence, still says that the Sunset Strip killers were really Carol and Jack, and that Carol had wrongfully accused him. I know, he's still on it to this day. Now, Carol actually supported Doug's innocence, even after testifying against him, after she's in jail. Yeah, she still supports him. and would tell him, like, yeah, you should do anything you can to discredit me, and yeah, here's anything I can do to help you. Like, very bizarre. Very bizarre. I mean, that's Carol, though. That's Carol. Now, police have said that they believe Doug may have had anywhere as high as, like, 25 other victims out there, but they've refused to release, like, why they would think this. But yeah, there are definitely those who think that there are more victims of Doug and Carol out there, that they just either are listed under as Jane Does and are unidentified, or they just haven't been found. Doug did end up marrying a woman while behind bars, his typical heavyset, older, lonelier woman named Kelly Keniston. Yeah, he married her behind bars. She also maintains her husband's innocence. Oh, please. Oh, please. And to this day, Doug says that he was set up by Carol and Jack. And yeah, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And there are those who do believe him, by the way. Doug does have those who believe he may be innocent. And I tried finding out any divorce information between Kelly and Doug. I couldn't, so I don't know if she is still married to him or if she's still alive. Not sure. But yeah, that was the sadistic, twisted, disgusting tale of Doug Clark and Carol Bundy, aka the Sunset Strip Killers. And oh my gosh, I can't believe this case doesn't get as much like mainstream attention as like Richard Ramirez or the Toolbox Killers. Like, that was gnarly. That was a gnarly, like, I feel kind of dirty after that. I feel like I need to shower after that. Please let me know, what do you think of this case? Like, isn't it bizarre? And what Carol do you buy? Do you buy, like, the dim-witted, gullible Carol? Or do you think she was just as like, cold and manipulative as Doug? I'm super curious to know, like, who do you think Carol Bundy was? I'm not even sure if she knew who she was, honestly. This case was a trip. Honestly, I know this is probably messed up, but, like, I'm not really all that sad that Jack was killed. I'm sorry. Like, read that book. Like, read this book. I'm sorry. Like, he is a terrible, awful, rapist, abusive a-hole. And Jeanette could have done so much better. And I don't know. I know that's probably messed up, but, like, I'm sorry. I believe that it's okay, like, to talk about people how they were. And I'm sorry, everything that I read about him was not very nice. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for hanging in there. I know this was a lot. This was a long one. That's what I do here. I do deep dives, you know? I've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of stuff to say. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you have any case suggestions. I would love to hear case suggestions. I already got a case suggestion from a comment in one of my other videos, so I totally have that on my list. Yeah, thank you again for watching. Thank you again to Mindy Brushes for letting me be an ambassador. I totally loved using these brushes. They're so cute. One of my faves. I cannot wait to order some more. And yeah, until next Tuesday, I hope you stay safe. Take care of yourself out there. Remember, don't be a dick, especially if you go out in public, especially if you're interacting with service workers. Please just be decent, all right? Be decent, man, all right? Those jobs suck. They're hard. Chances are you couldn't do it and you don't want to do it, so just be decent out there, all right? And yeah, I will see you next Tuesday for another Crime Dive. Bye-bye.